Hello everyone and welcome to the New York Empoleon draft analysis video for the UBL season 4, the first UBL season in Generation 8 and my second Wi-Fi league of the generation. Of course, the PCL is done. It is not going to continue, unfortunately. We were just hitting our stride with that team, but that's the way that it goes sometimes. You just don't get the chance to finish out a season. A lot of people were dropping. We are using a different timer rule for this league, which I will be able to hopefully utilize. I actually haven't tested yet, but I have to do that after I record this video at some point. And then we're using that other timer, which hopefully people won't have as many problems with. There's no Dynamax, which people were also very frustrated by. So similar in scope as far as it's a Wi-Fi league. We're using the 10-minute chess timer. So when you click a move, you are locked in and the timer for you stops. And if your timer runs out, then you lose the game. So you have a total of 10 minutes to make all of your decisions throughout the entire game. And then when you're watching animations or waiting for your opponent, your timer is not counting down. Therefore, you actually end up with a lot more than an overall 20-minute timer that counts down during animations while your opponent is choosing after you have selected and things like that. So, and you can't timer stall somebody because if your timer runs out, you lose, as opposed to the general timer running out and whoever has fewer Pokemon remaining losing. So it is, in my opinion, a superior option. There's also the option in this in Generation 8 of a 30-minute timer. That being said, this requires a crazy setup with like LAN connections that I honestly don't fully understand at this point, but such is the way it goes. That's not what you're here for. You guys will watch my videos and you'll understand the timer, and you don't have to deal with the LAN thing because I'm going to be dealing with the LAN thing. So you guys want to know what team I drafted. That's reasonable since you're watching a draft analysis. So anyway, there were actually two divisions. There was the Sword division and the Shield division, and they were so that coaches, there was 8 coaches per division, and it was so that coaches could get a decent team despite the lowered number of Mons, but they could still offer spots to 16 coaches, which I really appreciated. And there are some amazing coaches. Links to every coach is in the description below. Anyway, so I actually was in the Shield division and had the first overall pick in the Shield division. And despite using it in the APA, which I'm not uploading right now, but as of recording this, have done 5 weeks of battles and am 3-2 right now, and am using this Pokemon in it as well. Drafted Galarian Darmanitan. This thing, in 5 weeks in the APA, has 10 kills. It is absolutely obnoxious to deal with for my opponents. It forces prep, and then I can bring the set they're expecting, and it still does work. Or I can bring a different set, and they have a ton of Pokemon that are just ready to deal with the main set, and then it runs something different. So that's really, really useful in my opinion, that it can do a variety of different things. Free Choice Band is awesome, because then you can run Choice Band, Choice Scarf, which is obviously something everyone loves. Zen mode is also really good because it boosts this thing's speed to like ridiculous amounts. I think it's 145 speed and 160 attack when you use Zen mode. Plus you can run Slackberry or Lychee Berry or something like that to really like give yourself that extra oomph. And it already just does so much work and puts on so much pressure and forces so many switches that it's not hard to get up a substitute or something like that in order to help facilitate getting the Zen mode off. So this thing does so much work, and I have had matchups that are won on this thing at 1% after 4 rounds of rocks. It just can't be dealt with at that point, and it just wins the game. So this thing alive, doesn't matter if it's healthy, just still has a chance to win the game. And so that was I was like, you know what, first overall pick, I'm going to take this thing as many times as I possibly can before it gets banned out of the format, because I don't know how long it's going to last. I think it's a little bit too good for the format, but I'm certainly going to use it and prove that that's too good for the format before it gets thrown out of the format in its entirety. So next up, I decided I was going to try to figure out something that would pair well with Darmanitan, and I didn't want to use what I was using in the APA, which obviously you guys don't necessarily know because I'm not uploading those battles, but I do need a bulky water to pair with this thing. There's a handful of them that can deal with it decently well, and one of those Pokemon is Milotic. Milotic is an absolute tank. This thing is just so bulky physically, especially when you give it Marvel Scale, that it can sit in on Darmanitan and wall it. So I decided to take that off the board, but also things that are going to try to hit Darmanitan, the Mach Punches that'll be coming to try to take it out, physical, which Milotic can absolutely handle, and a lot of fire attacks can be aimed at Darmanitan that Milotic can just kind of sit in and wall. Steel attacks aimed at Darmanitan, Milotic can sit in and wall. So I figured it pairs super well with it. It also is a counter to it if someone else has it, so I'm going to just take it, have it myself, give myself that option to deal with the things that Darmanitan doesn't want to deal with, and additionally, it has such good utility because if I Scald and burn something, now that thing doesn't threaten Darmanitan as much. It's got Mirror Coat, which is super nice. Haze is really good to prevent setup sweeping in my opponents. It's obviously got Recover. It's got Dragon Tail for phasing, so I have so many options with this thing, so many different sets it can run. I believe it did lose Toxic in the generational shift, but that's okay. It did appreciate that, but now it has access to Refresh if I am running a competitive set for 1 week, and I actually have a free move slot for that. Sleep Talk, or Rest Talk becomes more viable, because again, you have a free move slot, and Rest does give you the Marble Scale boost, so there's a lot of different things that I can do with this Milotic that losing Toxic sucks, but it wasn't its only trick. It wasn't its only thing that it could do. And then next up, I decided, I again had the wheel because I was first pick, so then I waited for 2 rounds and then came back to me for 2 picks, and every time I'll be doing 2 in a row. So I decided to pair that with Dugtrio in this particular pick. Dugtrio, Arena Trap is allowed. It's fast, base 120 in this meta is out of this world. And I figured base 100 has become it's always been a speed tier to like hit, right? You want to have a mon at base 100 because it's a good speed tier that's pretty fast, but you're not really sacrificing any power in order to get extra speed, which sort of happens sometimes for mons that are really fast. And so Dugtrio going above that is really, really useful, but Darm doesn't hit that normally. It's 95, so I wanted something that was going to be able to take out base 100 plus threats. So base 100 to 115 pretty much is free to just take out with Dugtrio. Arena Trap, kill, switch it out, give the opportunity to Darmanitan to win the game. And Darmanitan having U-turn means I can just U-turn out on your wall to Darmanitan, bring in the Dugtrio, kill your wall, and now Darmanitan has a free reign to continue doing what it wants to do. Dugtrio, a lot of weeks, I feel like is going to end up being a 1-for-1 trade. But even if I can get a kill and switch it out and it can survive another attack and then switch it back in, I can always do that at a time in which it's always going to go get a 2-for-1. So it's a really good mon. I don't think it's as good as it can be, but Arena Trap killing things that threaten Darm is just absolutely fantastic. And I was thinking about things that threaten Darm, or not even threaten, but wall Darm, things that want to switch into Darm, things like Toxapex, which does not appreciate a Dugtrio. Can switch into Darm, things that outspeed it and potentially threaten it back in return, can potentially sit in on Darm and kill it. And so being able to U-turn, get into Dugtrio, which outspeed those things in turn, it's all about getting that momentum and getting it back. So even if Dugtrio goes 1-for-1, that's fine. It also is a rocker. You know, if it goes 1-for-1, I get that kill, I get rocks up. That's an added benefit. And so it's really, really solid in that role. It also still has Sucker Punch, so I can get some priority in that way. And then just spam Earthquake. I mean, that's just what Dugtrio does, and it kills whatever's in front of it because you can't switch it out. So next round, I decided I was going to grab Bronzong. Bronzong is the steel type that is off the ground, so you can't spam Earthquake against my team at all. And while that isn't necessarily true across the entire thing, I really don't have any Earthquake weaknesses, so great because I don't like having Earthquake weaknesses. But that also allows me to run Heatproof Bronzong sometimes because my team is so not weak to Earthquake, you're just not incentivized to run it. Bronzong is another rocker. Bronzong has a ton of fun utility. Gives me a Psychic Stab, which I wanted, gives me a Steel type to switch into things that wanted to attack the Darmanitan. Not to mention, it is a steel type that is not weak to fighting, which means that the fighting type attacks aimed at Darm are not super effective against Bronzong, which is super nice as well. And the steel types that are aimed at Darm resisted by this. If I decide to run Heatproof, then it can take the fire type attacks pretty well as well. So it really paired well with everything that I had going on. Also lost Toxic in the generational shift, but that is what it is. Gives me access to a Trick Roomer, which my team is not designed for Trick Room, you'll see that, but does give me access to something that can set it or counter set it. If someone else, his team, does decide they want to run it, I can actually unset it, which is kind of nice to have access to just as a fail case in the worst possible scenario. And then next up with that on the wheel that I had, I grabbed Galvantula. Darm Galvantula is what I'm running in the APA. It is devastating. This thing takes out the bulky waters that wall Darm. It gives me just another piece of momentum to switch into Dugtrio if something does want to potentially come in on the Galvantula. And then webs. You can't overstate how good base 95 speed is if the opponent has webs in their side of the field. And Galvantula is a very, very reliable sticky webber that gives me a good threat later on in the game. Obviously, Compound Eyes Thunder is just incredibly powerful. I think this thing has so much utility in other moves that it learns, with the typing and everything that it gets. And there's definitely a chance, there's definitely a time in this season where I may end up running like String Shot Galvantula to get that minus speed instead of Sticky Web, if I'm worried about something being competitive or defiant and getting a boost off of that. So watch for it. This thing has some fun moves. Obviously, Energy Ball covers a lot of its things that want to switch in, like the ground types that want to switch into its stabs, and it just hits things way harder than you expect it to at all times. And base 108 speed was also just absolutely fantastic. Another thing over base 100 to threaten those things that are going to KO Darm, especially the things that don't get Arena Trap by Dugtrio, things like Charizard, that is pretty good in this meta, is base 100, things like Flygon. This thing doesn't actively threaten Flygon as much, but Bug Buzz does do a lot of damage to it, so things that stay off the ground and do threaten Darm in return, I wanted to make sure I had a couple of Mons to handle those. After that, and admittedly, I said, look how much removal I have. For Darm and Galvantula that need it, that like require it, 0. I have nothing that has removal, so I've got to prioritize that, and I also wanted a fighting type. And I went back and forth on what fighting type I thought was the best, but in the end, I decided that I was going to pick up Surfetched. Surfetched seems like such a fun mon to use in format, and I haven't gotten a chance to use it yet. Has defog, obviously, but so strong. And you give it a leak, it's got guaranteed critical hits with Night Slash and Leaf Blade, which is actually just broken. I mean, that's just two different good coverage moves that guaranteed critical hits. So you can use Parting Shot, you can use whatever you want, and I'm just going to crit right through it. And additionally, Stab, Close Combat, or Superpower, super useful. Gets Poison Jab, gets Knockoff, gets so many good coverage moves that I just, and Brave Bird, that I just couldn't say no. It's better than the fighting type defogger I had in the PCL, which is Girder. It's cheap. 80 points was actually like, I was like, yeah, that is very reasonable. It's a speed tier that I didn't have at 65. I had a lot of fast Mons and then Bronzong on the slow side, so 65 would be nice right in the middle. And it did give me that removal, but I figured one Mon that learned defog that also often wants to be offensive isn't my best option. So I was going to continue my removal train, and this time, in the PCL, I drafted Mr. Rhyme. This time I decided to draft Galarian Mr. Mime, because I do think it's actually better. That being said, I was loving Mr. Rhyme by the end of that, but Mr. Mime with an Eviolite is more bulky than Mr. Rhyme, has base 100 speed instead of base 70 speed, but does lose 20 points in special attack, which is relevant at times for a lot of different calcs. But it is a spinner, so there's a lot going on back and forth. I do have 2 ice types, but I think ice types are really, really good in this meta, so I don't actually mind having 2 ice types. I do have 2 psychic types, yeah, so it like duplicated a bunch of types for me, but it did give me a spinner. It gave me access to an Eviolite Mon, which I think in this format's really good. And then just Freeze Dry with this thing goes through so many extra walls that it wouldn't otherwise be able to hit. Psychic and Freeze Dry go so far, and I was loving Mr. Rhyme where I was using it in the PCL, so I think this thing, we'll see if it plays like Mr. Rhyme, I'm not sure, but I'm actually really excited to use it and give it a chance to perform, and I think that it's going to be even better than Mr. Rhyme was. I think it actually has more potential than Mr. Rhyme did, to go further, but again, I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much I was enjoying using Mr. Rhyme, so who knows. And finally, for my removal pickups, I decided I was going to grab Braviary. I didn't have a flying type yet, so I wanted to grab one. Braviary gives me, again, another nice speed tier, an 80 that I was really kind of missing. Obviously, my Milotic's 81, but a Braviary and a Milotic, you don't think of them as the same speed tier because Braviary will often run speed, so you have to run speed for it, and Milotic will often not. For anyone who doesn't know speed tiers, just a very quick explanation. The reason that you want them is because if you have a Mon that's base 95, let's say, right, and your next fastest Mon, let's say, is 65 in Surfetched, and I have nothing in between, then every Mon from base 75 up to 94 doesn't really need to run much speed. And so they can all go Adamant, they can all go Modest, and dish out extra damage, or they can go Bold, or they can go like Impish and take an extra hit instead of running speed because they want to outpace something. So by putting something at base 80, now their base 75s, their base 80s, even their base 85s are going to be tempted to invest some EVs and speed, and if you invest more than them, then all of those EVs on some level are just wasted EVs, and that is stats your opponent doesn't have in other places. So that is something that you really want to consider when you're building a team, is how well does my team force my opponent to effectively waste their EVs on their mons. And so by giving yourself different speed tiers, you are forcing your opponent to prep for those mons at different speed tiers. So for instance, Milotic, base 81, will often not run speed at all. So my opponent, who has a base 85 mon, let's say Suicune, won't run any speed in Suicune, maybe 4 speed in case I tried to speed creep with Milotic. But now that I have Braviary at base 80, they may be tempted to run 12, 20, even 40 speed in their Suicune to try to stop my Braviary from speed creeping the Suicune. And so that extra 36 EVs are 36 EVs it doesn't have in defense, which means that my Braviary may be able to break it just a little bit more easily, and the calcs get a little bit more kind. And it's not a big change, but over the course of an entire battle or over the course of an entire season, the number of EVs you can force your opponent to change really does add up. And so I do think by grabbing Braviary, I got an extra defogger out of it, got really strong Brave Bird, another U-turn guy to switch into Dugtrio with, so my Volturn is looking fantastic. And Superpower is super good. I mean, it's not Staraptor's close combat, but it's still a really, really good mod. Double Edge is obviously really good, and it does get Defiant in case my opponent does decide to try to run something that's going to lower stats or something like that. So just a fantastic mod. I really do think it's going to put in a lot of work this season, and I'm glad that I picked up Braviary here. And with Braviary, I grabbed Golurk. Golurk was another Stealth Rocker mostly, and a Ghost type, two things I was definitely missing and lacking. Also another slow mon, because I really didn't have that side of the spectrum for slow mons. So I grabbed Golurk. I didn't really care for it to be another ground type. That wasn't really the primary purpose of it, but it was the best Ghost type remaining at this point in the draft. Things were getting pretty low, and honestly, it's a good mon. It lost Rock Polish in the generational shift, which is sort of frustrating, but it just has a pretty good attack stat and can just kind of dish out a ton of damage, or I can run No Guard with Dynamic Punch to dish out some fun confusions and see where I can go with those. So I think it was a good low tier mon. I think it was a good late round pick. Gives me that Ghost type, which I was lacking, because I do think Ghost has good resistances that I definitely want to make sure I have on this team. And gives me something to threaten Psychic types, which Galvantula does, but doesn't love to do. And then obviously Darm can U-turn off of them, but like that's an unreliable solution for a long-term game plan. So I do think this thing has a lot of viability in that sense, and gives me that extra Stealth Rocker to take a little bit of the pressure off of Bronzong and Dugtrio to do that in certain matchups, which I think is really good. Finally, it was my pick at the very end of the draft, and I decided to grab a Selgor. Selgor is super fast, and gives me access to Spikes and T-Spikes, which are two forms of hazards I currently didn't have. Also, just gives me a fun lead, gives me more U-turn. Final Gambit's always a good set. But even this thing sometimes runs offensively with Bug Buzz, Water Shuriken, and it does do damage when you decide to run it offensively in those ways. So I do think this thing has a lot of viability for the end of the draft, and you can see that my team, sort of a one-trick pony, right? Like, you can kind of tell what it's going to do based on just looking at it. There's two sweepers pretty much in Braviary and Darm. They're both physical. I don't have a ton of special offense, which I definitely am going to look for potentially post-draft. But you U-turn with Darm, Voltage with Galv, U-turn with Braviary, U-turn with the Selgor, into Dugtrio, and you kill the thing that is threatening Darm, and then Darm comes in and wins the game. Is that going to work every week? Absolutely not, and I'm going to have to improvise, but that's why you bring 6 mons. And I think this team has the ability to be threatening. Very, very physical walls will be a problem for this team, and I will have to figure out ways to break them, but that being said, I'm aware of that problem, so I am going to be able to handle it a little bit better than if I was just going in blind. Obviously, Milotic and Mr. Mime and Galvantula all turn around and say, yo, I'm super stoked that you said that physical walls are a problem, because we want to deal with them. But then again, this team, I think, has so much potential, and its ceiling is so high for it, that if I just switch something around for a special attacker at some point during the season, will be like absolutely golden. Anyway, Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you guys all back here week 1 as we take on Josh and the West Virginia Miniors and the UBL, starting back up in Wi-Fi leagues. I know the PCL ended in a very abrupt way, but we're getting back into it, and hopefully you guys enjoy this season. I will see you guys all back here next weekend. Take care, everybody.